Show on the Big 1520 across central Illinois. WHOW.
Top of the morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. My guest on the phone is Jim Bohannon of the Jim Bohannon Show. Heard here weeknights from 9 to midnight. Jim, how are you this morning?
Doing well, Seth. Doing well.
Good to hear. Thanks for coming on and talking with us as always. And let's take a trip in the Wayback Machine, Jim, and go back to last week and get your reactions to the Tuesday elections. Virginia, New Jersey, they had big elections that folks were watching. Some interesting news out of those two places. Also some ballot initiatives in Minnesota and the like. What did you make of the happenings of last Tuesday, Jim?
It was a pretty thorough repudiation nationwide of the notion that we are all deciding that we are very woke and in favor of critical race theory, and that white kids are born oppressors and black kids are born oppressed, and the whole nonsense being prattled by the left. The far left, it has been said, and they prove it so often, never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And they certainly missed one here by pushing too far, too fast. They woke up a lot of people in the actual meaning of the word woke, not the meaning that's been ascribed to it. The Virginia election results were no surprise, certainly from the moment that the governor of Virginia stated, or the gubernatorial candidate for the Democratic Party stated forthrightly that parents shouldn't be telling the schools what to teach. And people resoundingly voted against that notion. The New Jersey race, as far as I know, is not officially over, really, although the media seems to have conceded, and the Democratic governor, the incumbent governor in New Jersey, feels he won. Maybe he did, but I don't think the Republicans have conceded yet, nor should he, given that there are far more votes, as I understand it, still out than would account for the difference in that very tight election. There is, of course, the remarkable case of the New Jersey Senate president, a established politician who was beaten by a truck driver who spent something like $150 total to run for a New Jersey state Senate seat. And now the New Jersey Senate leader says that all of a sudden 12,000 additional ballots have suddenly appeared in one county. And we, of course, would all like to know just exactly what county and how the sort of thing seems to happen so often when the Democrats lose an election and they find just the right amount of votes just in the nick of time. And so there have been no answers forthcoming from the New Jersey Senate president, Steve Sweeney is his name.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a thorough repudiation. Minneapolis voted 56 to 44% not to defund the police. There were major Democratic losses in places like Seattle, for example, where law and order candidates were victorious. This is a nationwide phenomenon and bodes very ill for Democrats in next year's midterm elections.
Sure. Jim, are you surprised? I remember going back to the November. First, let me ask you this first. Going back to the November election last year, 1 year ago, I remember, it was kind of sweeping Democratic, that Democrats were going to have control of the legislature, the presidency. And I remember you saying, one thing when Democrats get in office, they tend to overplay their hand. And you certainly called that. It felt like that played out in the last year. How about that from your perspective?
Well, I think that, yes, any time that my prognostication proves to be accurate, I embrace that wholeheartedly. But let's not forget what the Democrats did not do. They won the presidency, and there's been no firm evidence that, in fact, that there was enough fraud anywhere that would have overturned the results of that election. And Donald Trump would be well advised to go out and campaign for Republicans now instead of whining about 2020, which cost the Republicans 2 Senate seats in Georgia, thanks to Donald Trump's personal incessant whining.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget what they did not do. They lost seats in the House. They down to like a 5-vote margin, something like that. They barely have a margin in the House. In the Senate, they barely gained control of by virtue of the Kamala Harris's tiebreaker vote in the Senate. They lost 3 state legislative bodies around the country in the year before redistricting and reapportionment took place. So except for the presidency, 2020 was not a particularly good year for Democrats.
Sure. Jim, as we look ahead here, or I guess kind of still reflecting on the issues of the, some of these elections that we saw across the country, are you surprised that issues like critical race theory, the defunding the police, things of that nature, are you surprised those took precedent over things like COVID, masking mandates, things of that nature? I think a lot of people, especially on the right particularly, had hoped that these elections would be more of a referendum on COVID rather than, and not to say they didn't care about CRT and those sorts of things, but it really became a referendum on that in school boards moreover than, like I said, COVID and the, all the things that trickle down from that topic.
Well,
How about that?
Everybody who is conservative is against the notion of people getting vaccinated or wearing masks, number one. And number two, you tell parents to keep their noses out of their children's lives, you get a reaction. You tell kids who are 5 and 6 years old that they're inherently oppressing or are the oppressed, this gets people's attention. I mean, these are obvious red button flashpoint issues that get people involved, and whether or not you wear a mask or you get a vaccination really pale in comparison.
No, that's true, but I also think there's a lot of pushback against the notion of mandating these vaccines on both sides. But be all that as it may,
of course, would also have worked for the Republicans.
Yeah, sure, and that's kind of what I was going to say next. I mean, for a lot of people on the right, probably the thought here is, hey, if it's CRT that's winning them elections, by all means, let's continue to tout that talking point. But along those lines, Jim, it doesn't feel like this is going away either. I mean, you've heard discussion in the days since the election last week that it's the you're hearing rhetoric like racist Republicans outvoting. They want to talking about their involvement in school boards and things of that nature, their pushback to CRT, and it doesn't sound like there's going to be a corrective course here coming from the left as we go into the primaries next.
They're not correcting at all right now. They're doubling down. And I don't understand it, where it ever became anybody's idea that removing police protection was suddenly a popular thing to do, that taking parents out of the lives of children is suddenly a popular thing to do. I mean, there are two kinds of Democrats that we're talking about. One are the hardcore far left ideologues, and they know better than the rest of us, and the rest of us shouldn't be voting. We should just let them run things because they're so much smarter than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And the heck with the outcome of elections. We're here to fight for the truth, namely, we're right, you're wrong. There's that kind, and there are the traditional kind, and the politicians of all stripe follow this. They want to win. And if you are not wedded to a certain ideology and a certain arrogant viewpoint, and you want to win, then you're going to rethink whether or not we, meaning Democrats in this case, should be condemning the likes of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia or Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona. Maybe those are the new role models for Democrats winning, not being so far off the edge of the world. And I'm not sure just exactly which group is going to run the Democratic Party. I am sure of this election proved that the average Democrat out there may be more inclined to spend taxpayer money on any problem, throw money at it, than I am. And the average Democrat out there may be a hemophiliac liberal. They bleed for all causes. But they're not in favor of tearing the country apart. They're not in favor of abject stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think the far left has been vastly exaggerated. The far left, the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the world, could carry maybe 36 House seats out of 435, maybe. And the for some reason, the people who are ordinarily pragmatic in the Democratic Party, the Chuck Schumers in the Senate and the Nancy Pelosi's in the House, are bowing down and worshiping these clowns. AOC doesn't command that many voters out there. She does in her own little gerrymandered New York congressional district.
Right.
There's talk she might challenge Chuck Schumer for his New York Senate seat. I hope she does. Schumer will beat her backside from Buffalo to Long Island, and she'll be out of politics at that point.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been saying on the air. Run, Alexandria, run, and get beaten and get out of public life.
And that's interesting, Jim. Why do you think there's such kowtowing to that faction of the left?
Other than the fact that they tend to be disproportionately young and disproportionately enthusiastic, I don't know. You're talking about people who got where they are, leading the House and the Senate in the case of Pelosi and Schumer, by being able to count votes. And I don't know where they get the notion that anybody, certainly not after this past Tuesday's election, I don't know where they get the idea that suddenly the left controls all these votes. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
They never have. And with any luck at all, they never will. So, again, I don't know, unless it's just a failure on the part of what is ordinarily a pretty reliable vote counting on the part of Democratic leadership.
Mm-hmm. Jim Bohannon of the Jim Bohannon Show, heard here weeknights from 9 to midnight on WHOW. Jim, any other takeaways from the elections of last Tuesday that we haven't touched on you want to put out there for us this morning?
Well, of course, there is always the fact that the electorate tends to have short memories. I mean, I would hope that between now and a year from now, that the Republicans will continue to remind us of what happened in Afghanistan and the ridiculousness of closing down the Bagram Air Base and abandoning a number of Americans to their fate in Afghanistan. I hope Republicans will continue to remind us, not just of us living in the Southwest, but everywhere, about our wide open borders policy that we have adopted, even though the administration refuses to admit that's what they're doing. Crime in the streets, I would hope that Republicans get very redundant and remind us over and over and over again. For those paying attention, that may be annoying, but unfortunately, many of us, maybe even most of us, don't pay attention, and the public needs to be constantly reminded. And if the Democrats are going to double down, then, I mean, in an ordinary year, since World War II, a new president loses 26 seats in the House. That's an ordinary in their first off-year elections. That's in an ordinary year. The bad performance of this administration means that you could see 35, 40, 45 seats. So even Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, saying 60 seats. When he first said that, I thought, well, that might be a little bit much. And now I'm saying, that's possible. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's days as Speaker end a year from January. She has less than 14 months to remain as Speaker. Republicans are going to take the House resoundingly, and probably now the Senate as well.
Interesting. Jim, I'll tell you what, I look at the clock. It came up on us fast, but we need a break here. We'll take that. Jim Bohannon of the Jim Bohannon Show, heard here weeknights from 9 to midnight. He's our guest on the morning show, and we've got more with him on the way on the WHOW Morning Show.
Let's check the opening numbers now at the Chicago Board of Trade on this Monday. I'm Jim Taylor for the RFD Radio Network. Corn starting the day lower, beans lower, and wheat steady to begin this Monday. December corn 551 down 2. March corn down 2, 560 and a quarter. December 22 corn 538 and a half, also down 2. November beans opening 1188 and 3/4, down 3.5. January beans down 5 3/4. 11.99 and 3/4. November 22 beans 12.06 and a half, down 4. December wheat starting today 7.66 and 3/4, up 1/4. March wheat up 1/4, 7.80, and July wheat down a penny and a half, 7.72 and a quarter. December bean meal opening 330.60, that's down 2.10. December bean oil starting today $59 even, up 22 cents. A look at the opening numbers, the Chicago Board of Trade on this Monday. I'm Jim Taylor for the RFD Radio Network.
At Baum Chevrolet Buick in Clinton and Baum Motor Company in Farmer City, our job is to help you and solve your transportation needs. This is Scott Baum. Both in Clinton or Farmer City, we'll listen and find options for a different vehicle, or we'll give you repair options to keep that car, truck, or SUV safe and trouble-free so you can continue with your busy schedule. If it has to do with transportation, we're here to help. Visit our full-service team today in Clinton or Farmer City. Baum Chevrolet Buick, right from the start.
MR Systems Wireless has an immediate opening. They're looking for a full-time internet installer to perform the initial setup of wireless internet and voice-over IP services, as well as troubleshoot and repair wireless and phone services for customers. You'll be responsible for the basic installation and maintenance of wireless equipment. No experience necessary. Includes health benefits, mileage reimbursed. Starting pay is $15 an hour. Find out more and apply by going to mrsystemswireless.com, then clicking About, then Employment. Equal opportunity employer.
It is the WHOW Morning Show. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. My guest on the phone is Jim Bohannon of the Jim Bohannon Show, heard here weeknights from 9 until midnight. Jim, I wanted to piggyback off of what you were talking about there as we went to break. You mentioned the failures of Afghanistan, the border crisis, all these things that Republicans can kind of pound away at here in the next year and remind the electorate of. You mentioned a short memory that the electorate can have. And, one thing I wanted to mention is, that's not necessarily a lot of times the MO of the Republican Party. They're not always on the offensive. It feels like somewhat of a group that can be on its heels and reacting to whatever, accusations are coming their way at a given moment, kind of stay in the course on messaging. It doesn't feel like that's a strong suit of the right. How do you feel about that?
Well, it certainly is something that they could always work on, and I trust that they will. They've seen the path forward in the state of Virginia, so I suspect that they probably will in that regard. Whereas Democrats, again, are acting as though we don't care if America doesn't like us. Well, you're campaigning in elections, so you might want to care just a little bit.
Sure. Interesting. We'll kind of see how it plays out and what the right does in the months ahead here as we again come up on some crucial elections in November of a year from now. Jim, you mentioned it again in our first segment there, just briefly. I wanted to dive into it a little bit more from your perspective. The approval numbers for Joe Biden are historically low right now. What do you make of all of this? What are you taking away from these things?
Well, they're down to 38% in the last survey I saw, which is the steepest drop since they were such approval ratings were even taken. And it's an interesting combination for the Democrats. You're talking about someone pursuing very unpopular policies and being very incompetent in doing so. I guess in a way, those on the right should applaud him. You're pushing unpopular policies, but you're also very inept at bringing them about. So thank goodness we don't have a competent liberal sitting at the Oval Office desk. But it's quite a combination. The man has shown over the years in his campaign and now in his presidency, and these are the things we've seen publicly. Okay, public appearances, what are euphemistically called cognitive difficulties. He's showing definite signs that the mind is, in his case, sinking. That doesn't mean that he's a blithering idiot or that he drools, but it means that he has good days and bad days. And if it happens to Uncle Harvey at Thanksgiving dinner, well, a few people laugh nervously. If it happens to the leader of the free world in a summit meeting with Putin or President Xi of China, that's a potential disaster. So it's not surprising to me. And don't forget that the people in power have seen all of the public events we have seen, all the times he's forgotten where he was and what office he was running for and all the rest of that. They've also seen meetings in the Oval Office, cabinet meetings when he bothers to hold them, and this sort of thing. They've seen more than we have. Trust me, the people around him are aware of the fact that Joe Biden is not, shall we say, improving with age.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As we continue on here, Jim, just in relation to the approval numbers of Joe Biden and, all of those things, going forward, what can he do to better that?
Well, of course, in the case of cognitive difficulties, my mother died with dementia. It doesn't get better. We're not in a position where that ever gets better. It only gets worse. There are therapies which can slow down the rate of decline, but that's it. So all he could do in that regard would be to resign. And of course, in many regards, just as a lot of people considered Spiro Agnew to have been impeachment insurance for Richard Nixon, Kamala Harris may be 25th Amendment insurance for Joe Biden. More than a few Democrats who might be inclined to get this guy out of there would say, yeah, and give us President Kamala Harris. The choice is not, shall we say, palatable to a lot of Democrats who recognize her as a person who just doesn't seem to have a knack for politics.
How did the left get here?
They got here, I suppose, by virtue of the fact that we have, to go really back to the beginning, we have abdicated control of our public education for the last couple of generations. We've been pumping socialist bilge and nonsense into the heads of young people. So you wind up with a lot of young people who think that socialism is wonderful, except, of course, wherever it's ever been tried. That's part of the problem. And otherwise, it's a failure on the part of people like Pelosi and Schumer to be able to appropriately count. They can count votes on that infrastructure bill, but they can't apparently count the votes of the American public. So, again, if you are more interested in pushing your point of view than winning elections, my advice to Democrats is keep it up, and we'll be happy to see you lose.
Sure. Quickly, Jim, about a minute. Give me your reaction to the infrastructure bill that was passed.
Well, there are a lot of things that need to be done in terms of infrastructure, roads, bridges, dams, and the like. We started a big building wave of those at the end of World War II, which, after all, has been 3/4 of a century ago, and a lot of it needs to be done. There is a lot of junk thrown in with that. Again, I wish the junk wasn't there, and there are questions of how soon some of this money would even be spent for roads and bridges and the like, as opposed to, say, public transit. You can't throw in public transit in a little town someplace. So you don't have the resources to do that. So my overall thought would be that they can count some votes the Democratic leadership can, but not all, apparently.
Sure. Jim, about 30 seconds. Give us a preview of your show this week.
Coming up this coming evening, going to be talking to John Fund and Hans von Spakovsky about the way we vote and how the left has changed that, and not for the better. We open up certainly the potential for fraud. James Golden, known to listeners of Rush Limbaugh as Bo Snerdley, has written a new book about Rush Limbaugh, and that'll be our subject tonight at 10 p.m.
Awesome.
So it's going to be a good week of programs.
Good deal. Jim, always good to talk to you, my friend. Jim Bohannon of the Jim Bohannon Show. Heard here weeknights, 9 to midnight. Network News is now.
The Big 1520 WHOW Clinton, 92.3 FM,